11.
Go ahead.
There's visible blood inside the building, inside the bathroom, in the back.
3 systems collided in Worcester, Massachusetts on the morning of August 18th. A 911 center, a police department that had to investigate one of its own, and a national movement built to keep cops alive, and none of them were designed for what happened that morning. We're talking about Kurt Solomon here. He was 57 years old. In a past life, he was a military police officer in Germany, stationed in Germany. He went to the academy in 1996. Then he spent 3 decades on the Worcester streets. His partner of 11 years said he'd take a man in crisis to a hospital instead of a cell, and he was killed inside his own home. And 7 days later, his wife, who co-founded the organization that fights for officers in crisis, was found dead in the woods about a half a mile away. Police are saying that it's a murder-suicide. There's nothing that's been ruled. Nobody's ever been tried, and nobody ever will be tried in this case, which leaves, unfortunately, 2 young men, Nick and Brandon. The mother and the father are no longer with us, and they're left to fend for themselves. They buried their father this week, and they're going to spend the rest of their lives listening to strangers guess, but we're not going to guess. So before we start, this is how we're going to do things. There are things that we know, there are things that police believe, and there are things that nobody has determined, and we're going to keep those 3 piles separate, and we're just going to tell you which pile everything came from. If you want somebody to tell you what happened inside that house, there's 40 million other channels that are going to do that this week. That's not our place. We're not one of them. So what we're going to do, John, is just answer questions of one another. The first, John, you're an active 911 dispatcher. You've been so for about 10 years or more. This whole thing started as a person down call. What does that actually mean in a 911 center?
Oscar 12.
Cool.
Can I get a 217 Wildwood Avenue, please, along with fire and EMS? Residents say that there's a male laid out in her backyard, unknown breathing. 11 assist.
A report of a person down is almost as vague for us as it could be for you. It could be anything, could be someone resting, taking a nap, could be someone intoxicated, could be somebody sleeping, but it also could be a serious injury. It's really a call that an urgent investigation needs to be done to check the welfare on that person down to see if it's really a problem, but it could turn out to be anything, Drew.
13.
Go ahead.
12. We also have blood inside on the house.
Blood on the side of the house in the back door, I got it.
We're not sure if there's anyone inside, but there's blood on the inside.
Okay, so we just heard some of the dispatch audio going back and forth, and it's mainly a dispatcher responding to the questions of the officers out there. We'll call them dispatch for the purposes of this episode. Dispatch is trying to call the reporting party back.
Oscar 12.
Go ahead.
Did you want me to call the resident back? She's the one that called it in.
If you can.
Stand by.
Why is that, John?
Because that person is the one who knows the most about what's happening, especially if we don't have a police officer nearby. That person who's reporting it is going to have the most information. And sometimes we can go through a set of questions and we might need more information, but ultimately that person knows the most about what's going on. And usually they're still at the scene, so you'd want to call them back.
15, can you tell me if that number that called in comes back? Anybody here?
I'm looking it up now.
Is the caller a male or a female?
It was a female. Her voicemail on her phone says it's Karen Solomon.
So the reporting party in this case, John, was, as you heard in the recording just now, Karen Solomon. Okay, so we have a situation just like we did with the Lindsay Clancy case in a sense. People watching this are probably wondering, you know, this is what you do every episode. You play the 911 call, you play the body cam, and then you kind of break the thing down. Why can't we play the 911 call on this one? Why can't we just play it?
There's some problems with that. First of all, there's an ongoing investigation. Just because it seems to be resolved in the news doesn't mean that the police are done investigating it. But there are S.H.I.E.L.D. laws in Massachusetts which prevent the public dissemination of certain public records if there are certain factors in play. We know now that a husband and wife were involved, and without jumping to any conclusions, it's possible that this could be shielded by those laws that prevent recordings like this going out for privacy reasons.
The domestic situations, they can definitely, hold back those 911 calls, especially as John just mentioned, a active investigation. Lindsay Clancy was a little bit different because in the courtroom, the judge ordered that there's no kind of redeeming social value to playing the 911 call for anybody other than the people in the courtroom that are trying to make a decision on Lindsay's fate. It's a little bit different. I mean, I guess you can make the argument that the Lindsay Clancy case is a domestic violence situation, but
they would probably play that call in 911 because it's how the investigation entirely kicked off, was this call for a person down. But Drew, what happens when a police officer gets on scene and when you find out that this person down call is actually something else entirely? Obviously, when police officers got to the scene, they ended up finding that a person had died.
Okay.
Go ahead.
12. We also have blood inside on the house.
Blood on the side of the house in the back door. I got it.
We're not sure if there's anyone inside, but there's blood on the inside.
How does that change for police officers who are responding from something that's completely unknown to something that's more well-defined and obviously a critical incident?
This is the Donald Rumsfeld principle of we don't know what we don't know. And this is kind of where your adrenaline spikes because they could see inside. They could see that he was down and there was a lot of blood. And you already have a call that led you there that said the same thing, that, he was bleeding or whatever the call said. So now you're having to make this determination, and this is where we work hand in hand with the people in communications. This is the reason for the callback. Like, you're trying to build your case. And in this case, we have an exigency. We don't know if we need to get in there and save him, or we don't know where she is. We have a female caller. So at this point, we don't know if she's a suspect or we don't know if she's a victim. We have no clue. So we call over the radio. We have the dispatcher call, hey, why don't you call her back? That was our last point of communication with anybody, and find out what's going on. And that's where they discovered that the voicemail comes back to Karen Solomon.
Here to the offices on scene at Wildwood. There's a male with a handgun permit that comes back there. Just use caution.
Nobody knows what happened. And like, there's this response element that you need to save or rescue whatever's happening. And then all of a sudden it turns into a criminal case because you see that, they're no longer with us. So that's what you're doing. You're trying to build your case. You're trying to put the pieces of the puzzle together. So while we're walking around the house, or maybe inside or maybe outside, and we're having you make these phone calls and do all these other things, what actually is happening inside the communication center at this point?
A lot of us probably trying to restrain our emotions when it's somebody that we know who's been hurt. At the same time that we're hurting, we also know to lock in, because this case is going to demand a lot from us and it's going to deserve our best. Every case does, of course, but you take a little bit more personally than you do professionally when it's someone that you know and someone that you care about. But also, it's just a lot of work. When something like this happens, you have to notify a lot of people. You have to engage a lot of the upper command staff. A lot of people are going to be involved in this. There's a lot of notifications. It means you're pretty much going to be swamped, busy the rest of the day, but you're ready for it. There's an energy that comes inside of you that you have as a 911 dispatcher that you can tap into, that is sort of a reservoir for when you need it. And this would be the day when you would need to tap into that for energy and for strength to go on. And you're just going to go to work, Drew.
I would characterize this as juggling flaming chainsaws. Like, this isn't just juggling chainsaws. So, because it's important that what you just brought up here, John, is that there's a notification system of the chain of command. It's not necessarily just the shift commander that's out there that makes notifications to the upper echelons about what's happening. I'm sure that they called their supervisor immediately, and their supervisor called their supervisor, and so on. But in communications, when you start, you probably have a good starting point of who you have to call. Do you see an increase in calls internally from people that are, and what kind of questions are they asking you?
Especially as it goes from the top up, sometimes even outside of the police department to other agencies, to people who are off duty. Curiosity questions come in because they know that the comm center generally is the nexus point for information coming in, coming out. People will just, instead of going to some sort of command post or going to a place where that investigation is actually happening, they'll call into the comm center, and we'll be spending a lot of time disseminating information to curious parties, people who need to know things, people that are merely curious. We'll be fielding those questions. And as I said, it causes a lot of extra work. That's what we're there to do, is disseminate information. But knowing when to do that and when not to do that, and who we should be referring people to instead, particularly when release of information about a death, it can be very tough. And I've handled questions from family members who are inquiring about whether or not their loved one was alive. And painfully, I had to duck out of answering that question because it's just not in my lane to make that information available to them, Drew.
I think what's important to talk about here is phone calls that you have to answer, different tasks that you have to answer. Talk a little bit about what you would be doing proactively in the downtime, if there was any.
Whether she was abducted or she's walking away on foot or whatever ended up happening, that cell phone can be used to locate her. And there's big questions about exactly what's going on that we have to resolve before we can trace that, because we can't violate someone's civil rights and merely just hack into their phone and find out where they are. We have to ask the cell phone company to release those records to us, and we can only do that in one of two ways. Number one is with a warrant that a judge approves to find someone that we're looking for, or exigent circumstances, which would probably apply in this case. If we have reason to believe that she might be abducted or a victim of a felony, or that her life's in any kind of danger at all, we would want to ask the cell phone company to give us a real-time location ping on her phone. And sometimes that doesn't always work. If someone turns off their phone or something, we can't locate them, and it makes it more difficult. But those are some initial things that I would be doing to attempt to locate her. And time is money. The more that we can find out and the faster that we can get that information to police officers and detectives in the field, the easier that we make their job. And I think it makes it easier for them to exclude certain tips or leads that they might be having and provide them with additional ones, Drew.
So we'll talk about Biggish Town, USA, which I have experience in. And you can never be overstaffed in a situation like this. What can happen, though, is what John talked about a minute ago, where you're getting a flood of calls from the administration. You're getting a flood of calls from the press and citizens and the public information people who need to know what's going on. And you're also operational at that point. You're part of the center is still doing callbacks. Part of the center is still monitoring the radio channel to make sure that the officers out there are safe. Then there are other people that are, manning the 911 and non-emergency calls, listening for little clues and cues of that area.
We will shortly be putting out a reverse 911 to the surrounding neighborhoods, again in search for Karen Solomon.
The call comes in at 5:28. The public isn't notified until after 11. Is that your lane? Like, who makes the call, and how would they notify a vast majority of the public?
Reverse 911 for people to notify people in a given group is really a command decision, and it's very important that commanders make that decision rather than having the decision come from the bottom down, because there's certain criteria, sometimes even by statute, of when you would use this, because it's very invasive to send out messages, phone calls, text messages to people into a given area. You're using your authority as the government to essentially send messages to people's phones, and we need to make sure that that's a legally durable and good idea, but also that it's not done haphazardly. If you send out too many messages, nobody's going to be paying attention to these things. If you send out duplicate messages or messages that are correcting prior messages, then all of a sudden the messages are useless. But Drew, let me ask you, why would we wait 5 hours before we would notify the public? If we're worried about somebody that is a killer on the loose who's not in custody, why would we wait 5 hours? I think that's something that the public might see to criticize the police for.
I don't know what they knew walking around that house. But also, it still stands to reason, because we don't know if she's in harm herself. It's my understanding that they recovered some doorbell or home surveillance video, like very close by, pretty quickly. I mean, relatively speaking. But when we talk about the hours that elapsed before they made the decision to do a reverse 911, this is a very double-edged sword. It's just like you talked about a second ago. It's privacy concerns. These phone companies are required by federal regulation to turn over address information and telephone information. That's how we know who's calling 911. It's all done through database. But so when we use a system, when we make the call as a commander, like who's doing the investigation, and say, hey, do a 911 call for like a 2.5 mile radius, you have to make sure that your verbiage is 100% correct. You have to make sure that you're ready for whatever's going to happen after the reverse 911 happens. And there's also an element, John, where you have to be ready for the backlash from using reverse 911. While you're small town USA Police Department, we are searching for a woman who is, this tall, wearing this color shirt and this color shorts. She may be armed. Do not approach. Please call 911. Now, all of that's going to generate a bunch of concern, and all of that's going to generate a bunch of questions and curiosity.
They're going to want more detail, and they're going to treat the situation like it's gossip time, when really a 911 dispatcher is going to be the most swamped at that time. You're also going to get calls for bad leads, information that goes nowhere, stuff that is not germane to what you're talking about at all. And some of that is just based off of misidentification. Some of it's based off of fear, because they want that situation to be resolved as fast as possible. And also, people are inclined to get involved because people want to be the piece that solves it. So unfortunately, not everyone can be right. They'll call in and give us a lot of leads that go nowhere, tips that aren't helpful, or misidentify people, but it's going to generate a lot of calls, and a lot of it's going to be based off of emotions. People doing things to feel like they're doing something in what is otherwise a scary situation, Drew. She actually was never charged with murder at any point. There was a little bit of time there where she was missing. She was presumed to be a suspect of this case for lack of better information, but at no point was she actually ever charged with murder. Can you unpack the decision behind that?
I can't, because I don't know the complete details of what was found inside. I think her warrant was for some type of aggravated battery or something to that effect. I wonder if they are, or if they were waiting for the medical examiner's ruling. If the medical examiner rules that this was death by homicide, and that it was by her wounding him, then the charge can be upgraded, and or they were just in hopes of finding her to conduct the interview to figure out exactly what happened, and they could have charged her appropriately.
She was charged with assault and battery with a dangerous weapon, and assault with battery with a dangerous weapon with serious bodily injury. That's enough to arrest her and obviously keep her in jail. It's not like she's going to get bonded out on those charges. Right. I think that they had what they needed to essentially take her into custody at that point. And like you said, let the investigation play out. A lot of people think that as soon as a warrant is issued, that the investigation is over, Drew, but it's really just beginning at that point, right?
It's not even beginning at that point. It's beginning when the warrant is served, right? So it's like the investigation certainly has begun, because they have to develop the probable cause to get the warrant. But like from the defendant's point of view, like the clock doesn't start ticking until they put those handcuffs on and they actually put him in jail. And, she would get a first appearance of some sort, probably while she sat, in jail awaiting trial. And it would have been a very intensive investigation.
Yeah, it's not
I have to be cautious about how we talk about this person who started this organization that we support because of a few things. So I want to be very careful about this, but we're going to tell you what's documented about what and what she built, because it's definitely transformed a few things that are near and dear to us. We didn't know her, and this isn't the week where we should be finding all of that out. I think that the dust needs to settle a little bit for the two boys' sake and for the family, and frankly, they're just now doing the mass. Nothing in the next few minutes is going to explain what happened on August 18th. And when we're not trying to offer a reason.
So Karen Solomon was actually, she was heavily involved in a nonprofit organization that was dedicated to reducing police officer and first responder self-harm and the mental health stigma among first responders. H.E.L.P stands for Honor, Educate, Lead, Prevent. These are the 4 pillars of their mission. And it began with a focus on law enforcement because they're sort of the most obvious face, the most public facing part of first responders. But it would eventually expand to help firefighters, EMT personnel, correctional officers, which I think is very important because they're often missed, and 911 telecommunicators. And of course, they're often missed too. The organization is providing education and prevention resources. They advocate for first responders like you and me, Drew, for people that are suffering from PTSD, and they collect data on first responder acts of self-harm so that we can understand, analyze, and help prevent the problem. And of course, they honor first responders who have died by taking their own lives, and they provide support to their surviving family members. And it's a situation now that is sad because of Karen's involvement and what that means to the community, but also the people who were helped by First Help and Blue H.E.L.P and Gold H.E.L.P and White H.E.L.P. Now this kind of casts a shadow over that, but we need to focus on the good that First Help is doing.
I want to be clear about where I stand, and I'm sure John's the same way. Like, look, separate her from this organization. Yes, she deserves credit for starting it and everything else, but it's a current running organization. And you'll see in this clip that we're about to show in a second that tells the story about how the police officers in that agency are hurting, that representatives from First Help are like involved in the process here, because let's not take anything away. This is a police officer who was brutally murdered. And so that affects an entire department too. So the organization itself is still doing God's work, like they're carrying on the mission, and she is separate from all of this. And unfortunately, Kurt's demise is separate. I mean, it's part of the example, unfortunately, but it's separate. Let's take a look at this.
Here at the Worcester Police Department, and another difficult development today. It's been such a tough week because for the last week, police have been looking for Karen Solomon. Now, her husband, Worcester Police Officer Kurt Solomon, was found dead at their home that morning last Tuesday. And they issued a warrant for her arrest. Now, in a statement, the rest of the Solomon family says that they are heartbroken and rudderless. They call last week a nightmare. The tragedy has also taken a toll on officers in this department. The police chief addressed that this afternoon.
It's been very difficult on the department, and it will continue to be. Now that we have somewhat closure, this is when it's going to really affect the men and women in the police department. We do have things in place for mental health wellness for the officers to take advantage of, and we're hoping everyone does that because it is very difficult.
Now today and for the past several days, divers have been searching Coe's Pond. It's a short drive from the couple's home, not far from where Karen Solomon's body was found earlier this afternoon. I did ask the chief if they found anything in that water. He would not say what those divers may have recovered. We're live at the Worcester Police Department. John Atwater, WCVB News.
Think about it. This is the reason that a lot of officers suffer, and a lot of dispatchers, a lot of firefighters, EMTs, corrections officers. It's the accumulation of this type of trauma. Like, they've lost a coworker, they've lost a great guy in a coworker. He died in a violent manner, and these are the reasons for like the social pressure that they experience because of stuff like this. That police officer suicides, still exist, and this organization that we still say we support is still trying to do the work of prevention and awareness.
You can look forward to a retirement. He was 57 years old. He got his 2 sons, but he's well known for just being a good guy in his community and donating extra vegetables to the food bank and really taking care of people. And this was a guy that was looking forward to the golden years of life, and he was heading there. And his 2 sons are still living reflections of what a great guy he was. And a lot of people are looking up to that, and it's a serious loss for the people in that community, Drew, and it's going to affect them for a long time.
So this is where the gravity should bring it home. It's a police officer's family. The police officer's no longer with us, but the 2 kids are, and they lost both parents in the span of 1 week in the most tragic way. Here's a quote for you. Kurt was a hell of a guy. He was an awesome police officer and an awesome guy, and he's going to be truly missed. That's from his chief. His partner of 11 years was asked about Kurt's sons, Nick and Brandon, and he said this, quote, They're very compassionate kids. They're intelligent kids. They're both hard workers, just like their father was.